Imagine a single drop of blood or a speck of DNA, rewriting history, not just in solving crimes but in setting the innocent free. Today, we're exploring the transformative impact of investigative genetic genealogy, or IGG. This groundbreaking science is not only resolving mysteries in cold cases, whether identifying perpetrators or giving names to the nameless, but also offering the wrongfully convicted a second chance at justice. What if the same science that uncovers buried truths could restore lives? Reopening a cold case often offers a second chance at justice, a fresh opportunity to uncover the truth. But for Ricky Davis, it would become the start of a heart-wrenching nightmare. In July 1985, 54-year-old Jane Hilton, a devoted mother of 6 and newspaper columnist, moved in with her 13-year-old daughter, Autumn, at the home of her employer, Wilma Klein. The household was shared by Wilma's grown daughter, her 20-year-old grandson Ricky Davis, and Ricky's girlfriend, 19-year-old Connie Dahl. For Jane and Autumn, this home represented a temporary haven from the turmoil of a troubled marriage. On the evening of July 6, just one day after they had moved into what they hoped would be a safe refuge, Jane stayed home while Autumn spent time with friends, and Ricky and Connie attended a local party. By the early hours of July 7th, Autumn returned home and hesitated outside, nervous about being scolded for staying out too late. Shortly after, Ricky and Connie arrived, and the three entered the house together. As Autumn quietly went to her room, Ricky and Connie headed upstairs. It was there that they noticed something chilling: blood in the hallway leading to the master bedroom. When they stepped inside, they found Jane lying lifeless on the bed. She had been fatally wounded, stabbed 29 times, her hands and arms bearing defensive wounds. A deep bite mark on her shoulder served as another haunting sign of the violence she endured. Shaken and horrified, they immediately called 911 to report the discovery. The sheriff's department quickly responded to the call. Ricky, Connie, and Autumn told investigators the same story, that they had returned home early in the morning and discovered her body. Despite their cooperation, the investigation stalled, and with no leads or suspects, Jane Hilton's murder became a cold case. For the next 14 years, the house remained silent, and the case files gathered dust. But in 1999, a fresh set of detectives reopened the case. With the passage of time and the benefit of new investigative techniques, detectives hoped to uncover the truth behind her death. But their focus quickly narrowed, not on new evidence, but on the same individuals who had discovered the crime. Detectives zeroed in on Ricky's girlfriend, Connie, interrogating her repeatedly over 18 months, beginning in late 1999. Using high-pressure techniques known to increase the risk of false confessions, they convinced her to change her story. Later, she claimed that Ricky had attacked Jane in a fit of rage, and admitted to biting Jane during the struggle, a detail detectives themselves had introduced during questioning. Under pressure, Connie entered into an immunity agreement in exchange for testifying against Ricky. Her statements became the foundation of the case against him. Her confession also implicated 13-year-old Autumn, accusing her of helping them move Jane's body, a claim that further devastated Jane's grieving family. Based almost entirely on Connie's coerced testimony, the El Dorado County District Attorney filed charges against both of them in May 2002. Connie received a reduced sentence of just 1 year in county jail, while Ricky was convicted of second-degree murder in 2005. 20 years after Jane's death, he was sentenced to 16 years to life in prison. From the start, Ricky maintained his innocence, but the system had shut its doors on him. About a year after his sentencing, he reached out to the Northern California Innocence Project, NCIP. Convinced of his innocence, the NCIP team began an extensive reinvestigation of the case. In collaboration with the DA's office, NCIP secured permission to conduct advanced DNA testing on critical evidence from the crime scene. Key findings: in 2014, testing revealed saliva on Jane's nightgown in the area of the bite mark. The DNA confirmed that the person who bit Jane was an unknown male, not Ricky or Connie. Further analysis of fingernail scrapings from Jane's right hand uncovered a male DNA profile consistent with the DNA found on the nightgown. The unidentified male profile was uploaded to the FBI's Combined DNA Index System, CODIS, but no match was found. These findings not only demonstrated that they were not involved in the crime, but also directly contradicted Connie's testimony that she had bitten Jane during the attack. Armed with this evidence, NCIP filed a petition for a writ of habeas corpus, a legal procedure used to challenge wrongful imprisonment in October 2016, shortly after the passage of a pivotal new California law. Then, in January 2017, the law went into effect, providing further support by lowering the burden of proof for presenting new evidence of innocence. Co-sponsored by NCIP, this law allowed them to successfully argue that the DNA evidence would likely have been compelling to a jury. This development marked a significant turning point in Ricky Davis's fight for justice. In April 2019, the judge vacated Ricky's conviction and ordered a new trial. Prosecutors initially announced plans to retry him for murder. However, this time investigators turned to IGG, leveraging the expertise of the Sacramento County Crime Lab and DA's office, hoping it could provide the answers that had eluded them for decades. By uploading the unknown male DNA profile found on Jane's nightgown and under her fingernails to a public genealogy database, investigators built a family tree that led them to Michael Green, one of 3 teenagers Autumn encountered at a park on the night of the murder. That night was likely the first time she had met Green. To confirm the match, detectives collected DNA surreptitiously from Green's household garbage. The results were undeniable. His DNA matched the evidence from the crime scene. A buccal swab taken from Green later confirmed the match, ending decades of mystery. On February 13, 2020, 15 years after Ricky Davis was wrongfully convicted, the El Dorado County District Attorney's Office held a press conference announcing that all charges against him would be dismissed, highlighting the pivotal role of IGG in achieving this breakthrough.
Without investigative genetic genealogy, we would not be here today. This is the first case in California and only the second in this country where investigative genetic genealogy has not only led to the freeing of an individual from prison for a crime he did not commit, but the identification of the true source, and as we now know, the arrest of the person that did have that DNA.
The judge officially declared him factually innocent, and he was finally released from prison. The same genetic evidence that cleared Ricky Davis also identified Michael Green as Jane's killer, using the same genetic genealogy technique that had previously helped capture the Golden State Killer, ultimately leading to Green. When questioned, Green denied knowing Jane but couldn't explain why his DNA was found at the crime scene. Allegedly intoxicated after a night of heavy drinking and drug use, he had gone to the house intending to see Autumn again after they parted ways at the park. In 2022, Green pled no contest to second-degree murder and was sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. Tragically, Connie passed away in 2014, never having the chance to see her name cleared. But in 2024, Ricky returned to court, not to defend himself, but to fight for her innocence. "I want to see her vindicated. She was as innocent as I was. She was railroaded in a different way." Ricky Davis. Connie's 2 sons stood alongside Ricky, urging the judge to vacate her conviction. The court agreed, declaring Connie Dahl factually innocent and officially closing the case. For Ricky, freedom came at a heavy cost, 15 years of his life stolen and countless more spent fighting for justice. His unwavering belief in the truth not only reclaimed his own future, but also restored the name of a woman whose fate had been tragically intertwined with his from the very beginning. While his exoneration brought long overdue justice, our next story reveals how IGG helped clear not 1, but 2 brothers, ending decades of wrongful imprisonment. Can something said while asleep seal your fate in a court of law? Is there any credible scientific basis for believing that a nightmare or sleep talk reflects past experiences from waking life? For David Bintz, this unsettling possibility became his reality, turning words allegedly spoken while asleep into the centerpiece of a murder conviction that not only destroyed his future but also devastated his younger brother, Robert's. On August 4, 1987, A couple horseback riding through Wisconsin's remote Mashikani forest stumbled upon a grim scene, a lifeless body lying more than 50 feet from a horse trail, partially covered by leaves and forest debris. The victim was soon identified as 44-year-old Sandra Lyson. 2 days before the discovery, on the night of August 2nd, Sandra had been working her regular shift as a bartender at the Good Times Tavern in Green Bay, Wisconsin. Amid the usual late-night buzz, she served drinks and managed the busy establishment. By 2 a.m., the bar closed, and Sandra was expected to lock up and head home, as she always did. But hours later, shortly before 5 a.m., another employee arrived and immediately sensed something was wrong. Her car was still parked outside. The bar's front door was unlocked. The cash register was open, and nearly $2,600 was missing. An autopsy later revealed that she had been strangled, likely with the perpetrator's hands or forearm, as no ligature marks were present. Based on the absence of drag marks and the presence of leaves and debris in her clothing, investigators concluded that she had been killed elsewhere and her body was deliberately left in the forest, about 30 miles north of Green Bay. Despite interviewing hundreds of people over the next decade, law enforcement struggled to determine her killer. They pursued the case as a violent crime with a likely sexual motive, but their efforts sadly led nowhere, and the case ultimately went cold. About 11 years after Sandra Lyson's murder, in the spring of 1998, detectives from the Green Bay Police Department received an unexpected call from a correctional institution. An inmate claimed he had heard fellow prisoner David Bintz talking in his sleep, allegedly confessing to killing a woman. This claim, while unsubstantiated, intrigued investigators, given the unresolved nature of Sandra's case. The case briefly intersected with the Bintz brothers back in 1987. Detectives questioned David and Robert about David's angry call to the Good Times Tavern that night, during which he threatened to blow up the bar over what he believed was an overcharged beer purchase. However, with no direct evidence linking them to the crime, the brothers quickly faded from law enforcement's radar. Armed with the informant's detailed account, detectives traveled to the Oshkosh Correctional Institution in April 1998 to confront David, who was incarcerated at the time for an unrelated conviction. Presented with the written statement, David reportedly corroborated key aspects of the story and implicated Robert, claiming his brother had attacked Sandra to prevent her from identifying them after a robbery. With David's admissions in hand, detectives expanded their investigation, revisiting old leads and interviewing several of his fellow inmates. Despite inconsistencies in David's statements, including claims that he had been home during the crime and was not involved, prosecutors pressed forward. They built their case largely on second-hand testimony from multiple prisoners, including the informant who initially reported David's alleged sleep talk. In 1999, David and Robert Bintz were formally charged with first-degree murder as parties to the crime, a shared legal responsibility under Wisconsin law. David's supposed words during sleep, along with his later conflicting statements and confessions, became the cornerstone of the prosecution's case, propelling the brothers into a legal battle they never anticipated. For over a decade, law enforcement maintained that Sandra's murder was driven by a sexual motive. The partial removal of her clothing, the presence of semen, and the shifting of her underwear supported this theory. However, forensic testing eventually excluded both David and Robert as the source of the semen and the unidentified blood found on her dress. With no physical evidence pointing to alternative suspects, prosecutors remained focused on the Bintz brothers and reshaped their narrative. As the trial approached, the state abandoned its original theory of a sexually motivated crime. Instead, they argued that the murder stemmed from a robbery gone wrong, allegedly triggered by David's anger over an overcharged case of beer. According to this revised theory, Sandra was killed to prevent her from identifying the brothers after the alleged robbery, despite lingering questions about the unresolved physical evidence. Since David and Robert were charged together but tried separately, David's trial for first-degree murder began in May 2000. The prosecution presented a compelling yet unconventional case, built on David's alleged sleep talk, reported confessions to fellow inmates, and conflicting statements made during police interrogations. Prosecutors described the crime as a robbery spiraling into violence, with Sandra killed to silence her as a witness. The defense countered by challenging the reliability of sleep talk as evidence, arguing that it is involuntary, nonsensical, and scientifically unreliable. They also highlighted David's intellectual disabilities, asserting that he was highly susceptible to manipulation and coercion. His lawyers criticized the state's reliance on prison informants, pointing out inconsistencies in their accounts and the lack of corroboration. Despite these arguments, the jury was ultimately swayed by the prosecution's narrative, reinforced by David's recorded confessions, however inconsistent. David was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Just 2 months after David's conviction, Robert faced his own trial for first-degree murder in July. Unlike his brother, Robert opted for a bench trial, entrusting his fate to a judge rather than a jury. This decision likely reflected a strategic move by his defense, given the intricate legal issues at hand, particularly the admissibility of hearsay evidence, confrontation rights, and procedural challenges surrounding his alleged involvement. With David refusing to testify and the prosecution's primary informant having died in a car accident, the state relied on recorded testimony from David's trial and statements made during interrogations. These accounts portrayed Robert as David's accomplice, allegedly participating in both the robbery and the murder. The defense countered by emphasizing the total absence of physical or forensic evidence linking Robert to the crime. His attorneys argued that David's evolving narratives were unreliable, shaped by coercion, manipulation, and cognitive limitations. They also contested the admissibility of David's prior statements, asserting they violated Robert's Sixth Amendment right to confront his accuser. Despite this challenge, the judge determined that the statements met legal standards due to their previous cross-examination, allowing them to be admitted into evidence. Throughout the proceedings, Robert consistently maintained his innocence, asserting he had no involvement in the crime.
I'm not going to take the blame for something that I didn't have nothing to do with, and I swear to God I'm telling you the truth on that. I'm not taking the blame for something that I'm being accused of.
However, after weighing the conflicting narratives, the judge found him guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced him to life in prison, with no physical evidence but a patchwork of accusations. His fate was sealed in a courtroom battle built on words spoken by others rather than definitive proof. After their convictions, both brothers pursued separate appeals. In 2006, the Wisconsin Innocence Project, representing David, secured additional DNA testing that confirmed the presence of the same unidentified male's DNA in both the semen and blood found on Sandra's dress. However, prosecutors dismissed the DNA as unrelated to the murder, claiming it stemmed from her personal life and had no bearing on the brothers' alleged involvement. They maintained that the evidence did not undermine the case's core narrative or the jury's conclusions. The court denied David's motion for a new trial, a decision upheld on appeal in 2009. With legal options dwindling, the brothers' future seemed bleak, until a renewed effort for justice reignited the case. In 2018, the Great North Innocence Project, GNIP, took on Robert's case, launching an intensive reinvestigation. Following a court order in November 2019, the state and defense collaborated to locate and test any remaining crime scene evidence. While Sandra's fingernail clippings, never tested, were found missing, analysts at Bode Technology Laboratory conducted extensive testing on the other remaining evidence. Using advanced forensic techniques, analysts confirmed that none of the tested evidence matched David or Robert. DNA from semen, blood on her dress and shoes, and hairs recovered from her body, dress, and underwear consistently pointed to an unidentified male, conclusive proof that the Bintz brothers were not involved. From the semen sample, analysts developed an advanced single nucleotide polymorphism (SNP) profile, which opened the door for Investigative Genetic Genealogy (IGG). However, initial efforts to identify the unknown male stalled without a clear lead. Then, in 2023, GNIP partnered with the Investigative Genetic Genealogy Center at Ramapo College to reanalyze the genetic data. Within only 2 days, the student team narrowed the search to a family with 3 sons from the Green Bay area. One name immediately stood out: William Joseph Hendricks. Hendricks, convicted of violent crimes in the early 1980s, had a history of breaking into homes and targeting women. In 1981, he twice broke into a Green Bay woman's home and threatened her life by grabbing her neck, an act eerily reminiscent of Sandra's case. Released from prison just 7 months before her murder, he had previously lived halfway between the bar and where her body was found, a connection investigators could no longer overlook. In August 2023, Robert's legal team formally notified the Brown County District Attorney's Office that DNA evidence pointed to William Hendricks as the likely perpetrator. Investigators acted swiftly, collecting DNA samples from his surviving brother and nephew. Although neither matched the crime scene profile, these results further solidified Hendricks as the prime suspect. With all leads pointing to him, the court approved an extraordinary measure, the disinterment of his body, about 24 years after his death. In May 2024, under strict supervision, forensic experts retrieved biological samples, which were sent for DNA analysis. After months of extensive testing, in August, the lab confirmed a conclusive match between Hendricks' DNA profile and the semen found on Sandra's body. The odds of the DNA belonging to anyone else were an astronomical 1 in 329 trillion. The following month, after reviewing a comprehensive motion detailing conclusive DNA evidence, Hendricks' violent criminal history, and the absence of any known connection between him and Sandra, the court acknowledged significant gaps in the original investigation. Despite interviewing thousands of people linked to Sandra, law enforcement never encountered Hendricks' name, a striking oversight that not only kept the Bintz brothers imprisoned for decades, but also underscored the implausibility of any connection between Sandra and Hendricks. Defense attorneys highlighted Sandra's devoted family-centered life, dismissing any suggestion of a secret connection to Hendricks as both baseless and a disservice to her memory. On September 25, 2024, the court dismissed all charges against both brothers, formally recognizing their wrongful convictions, with undeniable DNA evidence identifying the real perpetrator. This case marked a turning point in forensic justice. The exoneration of the Bintz brothers demonstrates the transformative potential of modern forensic science. Tools like IGG not only bring overdue clarity to cases once deemed unsolvable, but also serve as revolutionary instruments in overturning wrongful convictions. To date, only a few documented cases in the United States have achieved this milestone. Our next and final story revisits the case that set this extraordinary precedent, the first exoneration in history made possible by IGG. On November 5, 2023, communities across the nation mourned Christopher Tapp, a man whose life embodied resilience and redemption. Widely recognized as the first person to be exonerated through IGG, he passed away unexpectedly in Las Vegas, Nevada, leaving behind a legacy that reshaped the pursuit of justice. But what happened nearly 3 decades earlier to alter the course of his life? And how did it lead to where we are today? On the morning of June 13, 1996, 18-year-old Angie Dodge was found deceased in her Idaho Falls apartment. The horrific scene revealed signs of a violent struggle, shocking the tight-knit community. Angie, known for her vivacious personality and compassionate heart, had recently graduated with honors and dreamed of becoming a successful entrepreneur. She was a creative soul with a passion for poetry and art, and her infectious smile left an unforgettable impression on everyone she met. Her untimely death shattered her family and friends, leaving them grappling with profound grief. Investigators collected DNA evidence from the crime scene belonging to an unidentified male and conducted extensive interviews. But despite their efforts, time went by with no arrests. Then, about 6 months later, in early January 1997, a breakthrough seemed imminent. After Benjamin Hobbs, a man within Angie's social circle in Idaho, was arrested in Nevada on an unrelated assault charge, police initially focused on building a case against him. As part of this process, they began questioning his acquaintances, including 20-year-old Christopher Tapp. On January 7, investigators brought Christopher, a friend of Benjamin's, in for questioning about Angie's case. Initially, He denied any knowledge of the crime, insisting that neither he nor Benjamin was involved. However, as the interrogations progressed, the tone quickly became more intense. Over the course of several lengthy and high-pressure interviews, his statements began to shift. Eventually, under mounting pressure, he accused Benjamin of the crime, claiming that Benjamin had asked him to provide an alibi. As DNA results excluded both Benjamin and Christopher as contributors to the semen found at the crime scene, the narrative continued to evolve. Police encouraged Christopher to implicate other individuals, resulting in further inconsistencies in his statements. Each shift occurred after intense questioning, during which he was isolated from his attorneys, subjected to polygraph tests, and repeatedly assured that cooperating, under the terms of an immunity agreement, would spare him harsher consequences. By late January, his confession included his own alleged involvement, claiming that he held Angie down during the attack out of fear for his life. About a month after his first interview, on February 3, he was charged with first-degree murder, an additional felony related to the crime, and use of a deadly weapon in the commission of a felony, despite the complete lack of physical evidence connecting him to the crime. While Benjamin was convicted in Nevada for the unrelated assault, he was never charged in Angie's case. Christopher, on the other hand, faced trial for a crime he denied committing, even as his disputed confession formed the foundation of the prosecution's case. His trial began more than a year after he was charged. The prosecution built its case almost entirely on his videotaped confessions, emphasizing the details he provided about the crime. They argued that his statements demonstrated knowledge only someone involved could possess, even though evidence indicated much of this information had been fed to him by investigators during the interrogations. The defense countered by pointing out inconsistencies in his evolving statements, and argued that his confessions were coerced through threats and psychological pressure. They also highlighted the absence of any physical evidence connecting him to the crime scene. Despite these arguments, the jury was swayed by the prosecution's narrative. On May 28, 1998, Christopher was convicted. Later that year in December, he was sentenced to life in prison, with a minimum of 30 years for the murder and 10 years for the assault, sentences to be served concurrently. For Angie's grieving family, the conviction marked a step forward, but questions lingered about the inconsistencies in the case, the lack of any direct evidence tying him to the crime, and the fact that the true perpetrator of her murder had yet to be identified. Following his conviction, he began a decades-long fight to prove his innocence. His legal team filed numerous appeals, arguing that his confessions were coerced and unreliable, but these efforts were repeatedly denied. Meanwhile, doubts about his guilt quietly grew, particularly among those who loved Angie, especially her family. Carol Dodge, Angie's mother, initially supported his conviction, even advocating for the harshest penalty available. However, as years went by without the arrest of anyone whose DNA matched the crime scene evidence, she began her own investigation, reviewing videotaped interrogations, analyzing case files, and consulting legal experts. Her determined pursuit of the truth led her to believe in his innocence, prompting her to join the growing effort to overturn his conviction. Her transformation from seeking justice for her daughter to championing the man she believed was wrongfully convicted became one of the most compelling aspects of the case. After 20 years of incarceration, in March 2017, Christopher was released from prison under an agreement that vacated part of his conviction and reduced his remaining sentence to time served. Although he regained his freedom, the deal stopped short of declaring his innocence and left unanswered the question of who was truly responsible for Angie's murder. While investigators had used DNA evidence from the crime scene to exclude suspects, including him, the identity of the unknown male contributor remained elusive. In 2019, the Idaho Falls Police Department, working with Parabon Nanolabs and the Idaho Innocence Project, used IGG to create a genetic profile from the crime scene DNA. By comparing this profile to those in public genetic databases, analysts constructed a family tree that eventually led them to Brian Drips, a man who had lived across the street from Angie's apartment at the time of the crime, and had even been interviewed during the initial investigation. Using DNA from a discarded cigarette butt, Investigators confirmed with near certainty that drips was the source of the previously unidentified DNA. During questioning, he confessed to acting alone in the crime and explicitly stated he had no connection to Christopher. He later pled guilty to charges in the case and received a sentence of 20 years to life. On July 17, 2019, the Bonneville County District Court vacated Christopher's conviction, recognized his actual innocence, and dismissed all charges against him. After his release, Christopher devoted himself to rebuilding his life and advocating for justice. He became a passionate voice for criminal justice reform, sharing his story to shed light on the flaws in the system and championing compensation laws for the exonerated. Beyond his advocacy, he pursued his lifelong passion for racing, using part of his settlement to immerse himself in the world of cars. His unwavering resilience and optimism inspired countless people, leaving a profound and lasting impact on his community and beyond. But his life came to a sudden and tragic end in October 2023. What was initially believed to be an accident at a Halloween party hosted in Las Vegas took a darker turn as evidence of blunt force trauma emerged, prompting the case to be reclassified as a homicide in January 2024. This shocking revelation reverberated through the same community that had celebrated his exoneration just a few years earlier. About 2 months later, in March 2024, authorities charged Daniel Rodimer, a former professional wrestler and congressional candidate, with Christopher's murder. Reports indicate that the altercation stemmed from a dispute involving Rodimer's stepdaughter at the party. Text messages sent by Rodimer's wife became critical evidence, offering a harrowing account of the violence that unfolded. Rodimer, who voluntarily surrendered to authorities and posted bail, now faces a formidable legal battle to contest these grave charges. As Christopher's story came to a close, it was marked by an unsettling irony. Nevada, the state where his life took a devastating turn in 1997 after his friend's unrelated arrest drew police attention to him, would decades later become the place where it ended tragically. After years spent rebuilding his life and reclaiming some measure of justice, he had it all taken away in a cruel twist of fate. These unexpected turns wove a poignant thread through Christopher Tapp's remarkable yet heart-wrenching journey, underscoring both the fragility of justice and life's profound unpredictability. Christopher Tapp's story, and those of the Bintz brothers and Ricky Davis, reflect the profound human toll of injustice. These narratives are more than cautionary tales. They are testaments to resilience and the relentless pursuit of truth. Through these cases, IGG has demonstrated its potential to restore freedom to the innocent and provide long-awaited answers to victims and their families. Yet, as this groundbreaking technology evolves, its power also brings ethical and privacy dilemmas. Should we embrace its full potential or question the boundaries of its application? Their experiences remind us that while wrongful convictions should never happen, tools like IGG offer a powerful means to uncover buried truths and seek justice for those failed by the system. They exemplify the promise of innovation but also emphasize the need for vigilance, to ensure that justice remains rooted in fairness and integrity for all. Please like and subscribe to Whim's Wonders as we explore thought-provoking stories, mysteries, and fascinating realities, pushing the boundaries of our understanding of the world around us.